He's good.
Okay,
Recording in progress.
thank you. Okay, so I am calling to order the Audit Committee meeting for December 15th and wish to do a roll call. So Counselor Huda,
Here?
Counselor Kennedy,
Here.
Mr. Furman,
Here.
Suzanne?
Suzanne is standing in for Karen.
Okay, and the chair is here as well. Now, if I could please get a motion for approval of the minutes from the December 9 meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. It was 10:01. Next, I'd like to approve the Audit Committee charter that you've had a draft of for several days now, anyway.
So moved.
Second?
If I may speak to it?
Pardon me?
If I may speak to it?
Yep.
I'll just go on record for the administration again, that we think the duties and responsibilities that you've spelled out in the charter are broader than your actual authority under the ordinance that was passed. It's what I've said before. And that's my comment, so.
Yes.
I want to go on record that I disagree, and that in order to perform the duties required by the council, all of the steps that we have outlined in the charter need to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
I just would like to say that I feel that what I liked about what you created and the team created is the fact that it does go back to council if there's a question or if there's thoughts or ideas or before decisions are made. So the council is included in the whole charter. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could get a motion, please, to approve.
There's already a motion on the table.
Motion, we need
Oh,
to-
there is, I'm sorry.
we need to vote it.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Someone's keeping track. So, all in favor of approving the charter as written?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Chris, just so you know, you're going to have to do a roll call because I'm on Zoom. I apologize.
Thank you.
That's fine.
So, so does that mean that I need to go around and poll each person?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Counselor Huda?
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Furman?
Yes.
Mr. White? Aye. All opposed? No one? So the motion passes and the charter is approved. Thank you very much. So let's now move on to the audit and non-attest services. And I think
If you'd like, I could summarize what I brought down and think
yes,
it's up
but
to you.
I'm just wondering if Esther has received a copy of that.
It should be coming from Cynthia, Counselor Kennedy?
Let me look. To my knowledge, I didn't have it last night when I was looking everything over.
Yeah,
to
no,
compare.
she just sent it this morning because we just made this document this morning.
Well, that's not
So that's why.
helpful. Actually, let me see. I can probably pull it up easier on my phone.
And I can mostly talk to it if you'd like in the first instance, and then you guys can decide how you'd like to proceed.
Yeah, thank
So,
you.
And that will give Counselor Kennedy a chance to see if it has arrived. So as I shared with you the last two meetings, the administration, Karen and Judy and I, were listening very carefully to your suggestions and looking at the proposed a restructuring of the RFP. We took seriously the thought that we could break out the non-attest services from the audit, the standard audit piece. And so we talked about that, kind of pros and cons, and we concur that there would be some advantage perhaps in splitting those out. We don't know yet, but that it might make sense to proceed with assuming that Melanson would continue to do the non-attest services as they have done, and then structure the RFP for just the audit. So what I did is I took the document that I think, Chris, you last prepared, and worked from that, so with a number of your changes. And rather than try and get potentially two different firms in, one to handle the non-attest and one to handle the audit, that we should just, as a city, we'll just proceed with Melanson doing the non-attest for next year for continuity,
Right,
all the
things
good
we've
reasons
talked
that
about.
we've talked about, and then structure the RFP just for audit. So what you'll see is I took the draft I think you circulated last week, and worked from that as a base to just structure it for an RFP for audit alone. So that's where this came to, and I didn't frankly have a chance to do this until yesterday afternoon and sent it off to Judy. So we had the concept, because we've been talking about your discussions here, but just the frankly volume of work, it didn't get done until yesterday, and Judy sent me an email at 7 a.m. this morning with her quick comments.
Yeah.
So the document that I handed out to you, and I apologize, literally Cynthia was helping me do a compare document.
Right.
So what I did is I compared, Chris, the document you sent around on Monday, which was pretty close to the document that I worked off of. I compared the document you sent around to the committee on Monday with the document that I would say city administration prepared for an RFP for audit. And I thought that way you could easily see where we agree and where we disagree.
Yep.
And so I think we agreed that we would go out just for the audit alone. So pulling apart those two pieces. The places where we disagree is the role of the audit committee in this process. As I have expressed, and I'll express again, we believe that going out for the RFP is a management function, falls under the city manager's obligation and the purchasing coordinator. So we are prepared to send out the RFP. You will see that I pulled out of the draft RFP some of the interconnection between the audit committee and the audit firm. So I cleaved, if you will, closer to the way the city interprets the ordinance. So you'll see changes there. You will also see that let me go through the big sections.
Would you mind just citing
Sure.
where that cleaving takes place? And it
Sure.
looks like it starts, and the page numbers are now weird, so.
It's mostly because
guessing
it's a
it's,
compared document and it gets a little wonky.
Section
so.
D,
Suzanne, excuse me.
Yep.
Cynthia never sent it.
Pardon?
Cynthia never sent me anything,
Okay, let me shoot her a text.
so I'd appreciate that.
Yep. Okay. So what you'll see, the biggest changes are really with regards to the schedule of activities. what was your section H.
Okay, it looks as if the significant change is actually,
Correct.
if I may, start in D.
What page are you on?
Well, there's no,
Okay,
so item D,
Page of service?
going on to the next page where 7, 8, and 9, and 12 look like. Is that correct, Suzanne?
Yes, yes. Basically, wherever there were references to the audit committee, they were evaluated in terms of whether we felt it was appropriate to include that component. So those are the substantive, I would say, changes. In addition, I changed if you flip back to the selection process, and that section has also been changed.
So now you're going back into
Yeah.
towards the end of the
Yep.
document.
Yep.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
may I?
please.
Counselor Kennedy, do you have the copy yet?
I'm still trying to get it. I don't know if I should talk to her directly. I am looking for it right now. My thing just went.
So, I guess my first problem here is that if I read section, 4 correctly under C, it is anticipated Melanson would continue assisting the city. So basically, this is a new contract, and what you're saying here, if I'm interpreting it correctly, is you're not going to put this out for bid. You're just going to assume that they're going to take this. And I guess I question if that is correct city policy. Doesn't all the work have to go out to bid?
No.
Anything over 10,000.
Nope. Professional services, are not required. If you read the ordinance, and our purchasing manual is not required that we go out for bid. So we often do go out for RFP for professional services when they're substantial. Designing a, wastewater treatment plant, we went out for RFP for, an engineering firm when you're spending,
Right, but on
millions,
this,
so.
the estimate that we did get was $10,000 to $12,000, so that is over your ceiling there.
And it is not, it is for bids only, professional services, we are not required to, and in this case, we are comfortable that there are efficiencies that would allow us to continue to retain Melanson to do the non-attest services. As we regularly retain legal counsel who have experience in cases, we don't always go out and get new legal counsel when there's a related matter or for a similar or like thing. So that's why it's structured that way. So we don't have to go out, and we thought this would be a way to have some continuity and try and achieve the goal, which we thought of is go out and, see what the market looks like for an audit. So that was, I was trying to work with at least part of the direction you wanted to go while managing the fact that, we don't have the in-house staff to do those non-attest services, and rather than disrupt entirely the apple cart, so that if the new city council decides to choose a new and different auditing firm, that they will, there'll be some ease and there's not kind of an extra burden on, things falling through the cracks because we're dealing with 2 new audit firms versus potentially just 1 new firm, CPA firm, and there'd be, communication. Melanson has agreed, they are not precluded from bidding or proposing because they don't have a direct conflict. It's a threat. So they could propose on the audit, but they have also committed that they would work with a new audit firm if that's what the city council decided to do. So they have agreed they could coordinate providing the information. That's why that coordination piece is in there.
Okay, so
So-
I guess my next, I don't want to
I'm going
get,
to check and make sure, I asked Cynthia to make sure it got to Councilor Kennedy.
I just got it.
Okay.
I'm reading it now.
All right.
Counselor Kennedy, I think we're on Okay, I guess I have page 17, so I don't know where we are.
Got all, yeah, and I
Well,
apologize.
17,
Yeah, it's the way the compare
So
document
it's
works.
C, and
Yeah.
it's number 4. I
Yeah.
guess I just want to be careful that we're following all the purchasing rules, for one thing. I don't really have a problem with this. And I guess the second thing would be, if there is a contract to do this, which I'm assuming there would be, I would request that the audit committee be at least notified or see a copy of this,
Yes.
as it is our assignment to assist the city council in this.
So when we get to the point of doing a contract with Melanson for the non-attest services, it would be public record, and I'd be more than glad to share it with the audit committee. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. So do you have, has Melanson committed to a price?
We don't have a price yet.
But they have committed to doing the work.
Yes. I mean, we'd have to negotiate the scope and the price, but assuming that, you know, given the number of years together and what we paid, we're assuming we can negotiate, you know, an agreement that is satisfactory to both parties. So,
So everything was verbal.
yes, yes, and we'll have to get it to the next phase, but we're in the middle of trying to get that December 31st deadline. So we did what we could, again, trying to work with the interest of what we heard from the city council, from this committee, to separate out the two, and we're trying to find the balance point here, and that would work for our staff. And like I said, Judy wants to give this another read, but again, she looked at it this morning and said it looks like this is something she'd be comfortable with, Karen would be comfortable with, and we could get it out, frankly, at the end of the week. Like I said, just want to give it another read for typos and that kind of stuff. And I think what this comes down to is, as I said from the beginning, we, the city administration, sees your role as helpful, but that the ultimate responsibility for getting this out sits in the first instance with the city. So took a lot of your suggestions and prepared to work with those suggestions as you see here, but ultimately the responsibility falls to us. So that's kind of where we're, you know, our position on this is. And one of the reasons I changed slightly the selection process, I took out like the 70% and 30%, is because I know you've got two new city councilors coming in January, plus you have an additional member, you know, joining you after the city council vote on the 20th. And the law does not require us to have a lot of specificity in terms of percentages and weights. So I thought it would be best when the new committee comes in and you guys look at the committee looks at the proposals, you've got the general criteria, but then the new committee can have, newly constituted committee, can have a dialogue about where you think the weight should fall for these elements. So I didn't want to, I wanted to make sure that the new committee had plenty of voice and that opportunity. So I left the substance and added some because of the coordination piece, but I left out the weighting, knowing that you've got basically three new members who'll be joining you in January who may want to engage in this conversation. How do we weight these various elements? And frankly, you don't have to, we're lucky in New Hampshire law, you don't have to have a lot of specificity. You got to give enough guidance. So you could do an ABC in rank using these selection criteria, or do like a percentage as you originally drafted. So leaving that flexibility for the folks who are actually going to review the proposals. So from my point of view, those are the big changes. So.
Councilor Kennedy, did you, it sounded as
first
if
of
you
all-
had some thoughts.
Yeah, I do. I'm a little disappointed, but I'm just getting it now. I find that very, but then again, maybe we're trying to set people up. That's okay. I also am glad the new committee, and I'm glad we're thinking about them coming in. However, I also know that public comment will still be available. So there'll be ample opportunity for people to speak on this topic. I guess I'm just really concerned that we get this out in a timely manner, because I do believe there should be another audit committee to look over all this, because I find it sad that we've had the same one for so long, and I take some responsibility for that, not thinking about it before. And then lastly, the rule of not putting things out to bid, I find quite interesting too. So I am going to look that up and call a few people and see what that's all about. And maybe our ordinance is illegal. So I will look at that in general practices. But I think I'm pretty disgusted, I guess I'll have to be really honest, that I'm just getting this information now. We've been working on this, at least I've been to 2 meetings where this has been the focal point, and the city's just getting these questions or these thoughts in now, knowing that we were ready to vote and move forward so we could get it out. So that's what I need to say.
Thank you. Councilor Huda, did you have?
Yeah, in looking this over, I guess, the first thing I guess I want to say is that the audit committee is a branch of the council. And the whole reason we're doing this is to make this part, at least, independent. So to have staff go back in and adjust all this and then put this in is a little on the concerning side, again. And as I look through the changes that have made, basically you're taking the audit committee out of everything and putting the staff back in. So my problem with doing that is to keep in mind what the whole ordinance says about independence. Now, when we did this in May, as you will recall, you and I worked on this, and the audit committee followed all of the processes to take it to the procurement department. Then we got them back in. We followed everything not to exclude the city staff and their duties at all. So when I see things like this, just taking the audit committee out of everything, it's a little concerning to me. And since I just got it also, I haven't had a chance to go back in. The other thing I'd like to address is your adjustment of the criteria here, and your reasons for that just didn't hit home for me, because you've had this RFP and this grading method for 25 years, and why all of a sudden now is there a change? So I'm struggling with that. I agree with your schedule activities. I don't know if the chair put that in there for discussion purposes, but it's a real hard thing to nail down. But some of the other stuff that is in here, I still have to review. And as Councilor Kennedy said, getting this at the meeting when you already saw the agenda is a little frustrating. I know you're busy, everybody's busy, but this was out a couple days ago. So as far as that goes, that's another problem for me, and it still comes back to kind of the staff stonewalling on this and moving us right to the line.
I'm ready to move if others are on what was on the agenda, in the RFP that was on the agenda, with the changes of having the extra, I can't think of the word, I'm sorry, pulled out.
I'm sorry.
But with Chris's changes, having the extra tests.
Do you want the non-attest services pulled out? So that
Well, having them be done by
Mellon.
another group, if that's what we want to do. But I guess, I feel we've been going over that. This has been on the agenda forever.
Right.
And we went through a lot of work last meeting to make changes. Chris put those in. So that's my thought.
Would you like me to? So what I am not actually asking for your permission to approve this version. What I'm saying is, we have heard some of the concerns. We have taken a fair amount of your work product and used it out of deference to trying to take in and work with the concerns that have been raised about wanting to have a potentially different firm in, being clear about the difference between the NADA test and the audit. So the city administration, as we've made clear, was planning to get an RFP out before the end of the year to follow through on Karen's commitment, city manager's commitment to go out for a new RFP. And we plan to get this out the door. So I will be just very frank with you that we don't feel we need your authority or approval on any particular RFP document, but we are grateful for the input that you have provided. We didn't always agree with it, but what we did agree with, you will see in this document. And my intention and I apologize that we just couldn't turn it around fast enough. Like I said, I looked at your document on Monday and tried to then quickly grab what I thought we could do so that you would know here's where we're headed from an administration point of view, which I think is somewhat in accord, if not entirely in accord. At least we are part of the way of trying to hear and recognize some of the input that you have provided. And I think we are prepared to also provide, hear from more input when we meet next year to look at proposals with the newly constituted group and, get some additional feedback, and the recommendations on the proposals that come in. So I think we are trying to find that middle path between what is a fairly narrow authority under, as we view the ordinance that was passed, and the authority of the committee, but still wanting to take perspective, and I think that process will continue. But we are drawing the line, so to speak, in terms it is the city management's responsibility to get this RFP out the door in a manner that we feel is most appropriate. And we did direct Melanson not to respond to an individual inquiry from you as chair. So know that it is not them deciding what to do. We directed them because we're the holder of the contract and the relationship with them. So just know it's not Alina,
Now, the
Corsack.
people you're sending out the RFP to, is Chris's suggestions being?
So I would be happy, as I indicated before, if you've got a list, if you want to send them to me, I will get them to the purchasing coordinator so that we can make sure that those firms do get and are aware of this solicitation, so that continues. We anticipate working with the new city council. I think we've talked about possibly having a work session with them, to which the audit committee would be invited when we get the results of the audit, and we bring the auditor in to then ask questions about the audit, that I assume that the new city council would want to invite the audit committee to be part of that conversation with the auditor. So that's why I'm trying to tell you, I know it may not be entirely what you want, but I think there is a definite willingness to continue to engage. It just may not always, like I said, we may have differences of view on where the boundaries are, but I think there's definite interest, and I know we understand that there's probably value in making sure that the auditors are, whoever the auditor is, in the future, and certainly this, as a result of this current audit, gets before at least some group of the city councilors and the audit committee to review their findings and to allow for a kind of work session Q&A. So that's kind of where we are.
Well,
There's also an ordinance that says that there's participation by the audit committee. I'm just throwing that out.
So
I'm sorry, Counselor
Yeah,
Kennedy, what was that?
Yeah.
There's an ordinance that says there's participation by the audit committee that was passed. And, but we can deal with all that later. But I think this is, a usurp from the city power, onto the audit committee, and that's sad. All we're looking for is, after 22 years, having a new audit firm look at the books. And for some reason, someone in the city doesn't want those books looked at by a different firm. And that's been pretty clear through this whole process. That's sad.
And we would disagree with that characterization, but as you can see, we're prepared to submit out an RFP that has a lot of elements, frankly, that we took and heard from you and tried to incorporate, so.
Well, I would echo the counselor's view that this is frustrating, and I think disgusted is an appropriate term. You certainly were aware of the direction which we were going with the multiple drafts that we sent out, in which was very clear the audit committee's involvement throughout the process. And furthermore, I would tell you that I communicated directly with City Manager Conard our view of the ordinance, and you were all copied on that. And what I just heard crickets. So it's very difficult to be operating in a world where the other partners at the table are silent.
I don't think I've been silent the last 2 meetings. I think I've made it clear that we were taking your suggestions and that we disagreed with your view of the scope. So my apologies, though, if I was not clear or direct enough. You know, I am trying to, like I said, I always want to hear a good idea. I don't care if I've disagreed with someone over 9 other things. You know, if that 10th is the great idea, I absolutely want to grab it. And so if I was not clear enough when I said, we'll take your suggestions, my apologies for not being clear enough that we felt that this
You were clear.
fall. So, and I still want to say, we still want to take your suggestions, and I apologize we couldn't turn this around fast enough. Like I said, my weekends are already part work, and along with a lot of nights. So, and that's why I tried to do a compare document. Like I said, we want to get something out by the year end. In fact, we thought we may be able to get it out by the end of this week, because Karen made a commitment, and we want to fulfill that commitment. And like I said, I think we took a number of items that you raised, and we are happy to get a list of firms that you think may be interested in participating.
So I will also say that I am offended by the lack of response to my email to Karen regarding our view of the ordinance. I'm further offended that you chose to insert yourself in the communication that I addressed to Alina Corsick without indicating to me that you were inserting yourselves. I thought, it would seem to me as if you at least owed me the respect of saying, we have read your correspondence and we are instructing Corsick to not respond to you. Because, you know, who are you anyway?
Well, that's why I'm telling you now, because this all evolved over the
I
last.
sent it Monday morning. Where were you? Frankly, you know, who the heck do you think you are?
Deputy city manager, deputy city attorney with responsibilities
And
to
we
the
are-
organization as a whole. Yeah.
We are representing city council. And talk about overstepping.
I
To-
don't
to
feel
me,
we've
I find
overstepped, but,
I find it very offensive.
so,
So, I will say that I am happy to hear that you have taken the initiative to discuss the fact that Melanson might continue on as providing non-attest services. I am very concerned about the cost process. It's why we went ahead and made this addition where we would try, you know, in due respect to the city council and the budget, try to have the non-attest services put out for bid. You've chosen to ignore that effort and go around us and negotiate with Melanson, perhaps in response to my letter to Alina, to make this arrangement.
Would you like me to explain our thinking on that?
Sure.
So during our last meeting, I actually thought seriously about whether to structure the RFP exactly as you suggested with both components. And then in conversations with the finance department and discussing how that would coordinate, given, you know, as we had some kind of informal discussions after the last meeting, you know, we've got some legacy financial software. It's not as easy always for us to pivot as we would like, that we concluded after some discussions that rather than continue that second RFP piece for the non-attest services, that there'd be a greater risk for either not meeting deadlines if we were bringing in two different firms. So we were just looking at the reality of not wanting to, if something's gonna change, don't change too much at once, particularly on this critical issue of finances. You know, this is the heart, really, of what we do, because if that piece doesn't work, all the services and everything else we do doesn't work. So that was the thinking over the last few days. So we took seriously that thought of whether to do it exactly as you structured it with both RFP elements. But when we played out the scenarios of what that might look like with two very different firms who might have kind of different approaches, different software, we thought, could be a recipe for disaster. So we thought, let's reach out to Melanson, let's find out, would they consider just doing the non-attest services? And they said yes. So part of that, and those were conversations Tuesday? So like I said, I know it feels awkward because I wasn't able to have a lot of conversations with you guys first. And remember, because of my right to know little radar, I don't like to send a lot of emails to the whole committee. So it makes it awkward. So I could have just reached out to you alone, and I'm willing to take responsibility that if I'd had a breath of fresh air yesterday, I should have picked up the phone and called you. So I will own that. I will own that.
Okay, let's say it's a year
And so-
it's a year from now.
Yeah.
Any objections to sending out two different RFPs?
I think we see how it goes. I think we're going to learn something through this process. So,
Yep, Council.
Okay, so I guess I'd like to address the statements just made by Suzanne. I don't think the word awkward here fits. The word here is basically pushing the audit committee to the side and staff is taking over again. I think it was very disrespectful of the chair not to even respond to him and let him know that you were in contact with her. The other concern that I have is when you go back and talk to staff about this, and I don't know the word here, if it's lack of professionalism or what it is, but for you to think, I guess, and even make the assumption that any kind of interruption or somebody else doing these services will screw everything up. These are professional people that are doing all this. And they are here, they sign a contract. And I guess I'm really, having worked with auditors most of my life, I'm really not understanding the fear here of somebody else coming in and, in your words, kind of screwing this up or making mistakes or anything like that. Because it's just, these are professionals, they are licensed in New Hampshire, they do this all the time. And it's kind of concerning that the staff is looking at it like this just because it's outside of the regular scope of what they've done for 25 years. So, I mean, that's a little frustrating, and it just seems like everything that staff is doing, I mean, I'm looking at a lot of this stuff, and some of the corrections in here are just kind of petty. Instead of putting in the most recent audit, which has been in the RFP, just remember, we did this RFP. You put in completed. Melanson is currently completing. Some of this stuff is just, why? You know, and I'm just looking at this, and the lack of professionalism here is startling. And you're basically, this is an audit committee that was, the authority was passed from the council, the governing body. The staff works for the governing body. Yes, the city manager is the head administrative person, but the authority to do this went to the audit committee through the council. So basically, to take the audit committee out of all of this pre-work to get to doing their responsibility is just like basically ignoring what the council had dictated the committee do. You know, and some of the stuff in here, basically, you take out the audit committee and you put the city attorney in. You take out the audit committee and you put staff in. It's all back to the same lack of independence that was followed for 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Attorney Woodland, I would second what Councilor Huda just expressed, because it gives me great trepidation, fear about the autonomy, the independence of the audit work when you and staff have essentially gone behind our backs. And I would just cite your interference with my communication with Alina as being a prime example. Gone behind our backs and pushed us out of the process, because that's where I know, I mean, I've suspected this all along, but this is prima facie evidence of it. I know now that you don't want us to be involved with this process, that you find our involvement to be awkward, that would be a nice way of putting it, inconvenient, and invasive in a world that you guys want to control. And from my way of thinking, that's precisely why we're here. That's precisely the point in that GFOA booklet that we exist. And it's precisely why the audit committee was established earlier this year. And so the fact that you are doing this, to me, is a great example of why, in my opinion, you're way off base. And it sounds to me as if we're going to have that discussion, because I will not accept the changes that you've made in here in removing us from the process. I will accept the involvement of Melanson with a couple of caveats. Number one, I want to see the contract that you develop, and that needs to be done post-haste. I want to see the price. I want to see this in writing. Everything is verbal, so that we know what we're signing off on. Because the non-attest service work is also under our purview. So you might want us to disappear and go right off into the sunset. But, dear attorney, that's not going to happen. Do you want to respond?
Sure. There is a fundamental disagreement between the administration and obviously this committee in terms of the scope of its authority under the ordinance that was established. And we recognize that. And there will be different views. I guess we did have an option of kind of drawing the line early at the very first meeting to say, we don't want any, input. But I frankly don't think that's helpful. I actually do think there's value in input and dialogue. So I don't think we are looking for your approval for what we send out for an RFP, but I think there was some valuable input that we did take into account, and I expect the committee will be, coming together in January and February to continue its work within parameters. And, I think I will point out that you didn't contact me or Karen before you reached out to Melanson, unless I missed it, which there is a possibility I missed it. But it is very atypical for committee chairs to reach out directly to our vendors and contractors. So, we have a difference of view on that, but that's why I was disclosing here that I had communications with Melanson about not preparing a response because I was going to see you today, and it would allow me to communicate with everyone at once. So again, because the email was to everyone, my replying would have started to create that sequential communication, which is disfavored under the public records law. So I was little awkward. It might have been easier if you hadn't copied everyone. Yeah, sorry. In any event, but that's kind of where we are, and I recognize you have a different view, and I'm still okay working with you with those different views, and where we can find common ground, I'm happy to take common ground, and so.
May I?
Please.
So I guess I have a question, Suzanne. You and I and the committee went through all of this RFP and redesigned it. We spent a lot of time. We went through the RFP and got it out in a short period of time, and you approved it. You were highly involved in it, and it culminated in a contract. We made all our deadlines throughout the summer.
Yep.
Even though we were on a short timeline.
Yep.
So my question is, after the audit committee has been approved and everything, I guess why are you coming back and changing our own work? And some of the changes in here are basically to change the criteria for grading out of nowhere when you've been using it for that long a time, and also in looking at various other communities and the way they put out their stuff. I mean, we were right in line, and you had agreed at that time that everything was good. So I'm struggling to understand why it was good 3 months ago, and now it's not. It's all changed.
So as I explained with the selection section, the criteria for selection, I was very cognizant of the fact that this committee's constitution is changing in January, and I felt it was not necessary or appropriate to limit too much that committee's ability to decide how it wants to weight various factors. And simply because we did it that way last year, which was, as you know, the first time we went out for RFP was, in 2021. So it's not some long-standing, 70-30 or whatever the heck it was, that was long, that was just last year. And there's no requirement that be in there in the first place. So I was cognizant of the change in the makeup of the committee and not wanting to box in the new committee and deciding how they want to weight the various criteria.
Okay, well, on that one, I would definitely disagree with you, because that was, for me, that was the saving grace of people who were not experienced, and we're going to be bringing in counselors that I am not aware of that anybody has a financial background in here, in the new council. And this was the most helpful thing that they could do with the experience that was on here. So that's why I'm suggesting that goes back in, because it gives you a really good outline of how to look at these and what you're actually looking for. So that's the problem I have with that. That was one of the easiest things for me, and for people who don't have a background in finance, you look at their proposal and you look at what our requirements are, and you just match them. That was a simplified method as far as I'm concerned.
So the beauty is these two gentlemen will be on the committee in January and can precisely talk to the new committee members to say, here's our suggestion on how to weight these criteria. So I actually don't think there's a loss. It is simply an opportunity then for these gentlemen to talk to the new committee members coming in and say, okay, here are our criteria. What would you like? Would you like to work for a scoring piece? So I'm assuming that you are going to have that conversation with the new folks that are coming in. So it may ultimately be scored exactly as has been suggested, but I am trying to be respectful of the fact that we're in a transition piece. But, you know, the three new committee members may entirely agree, oh, that looks great, and would allow you to have that conversation and dialogue because it's not locked in, so,
If I may,
yeah.
the RFP serves as a very important tool for communication with the proposers. And as I see it now, there'll be at least 5 or 6 proposers. So as a proposer, if I were to read through this and see what the weighting's going to be, I would know how to write my proposal. And in fact, it would give me great courage in seeing that, the weighting that is in here, to know that my proposal will be viewed in a favorable light if it, in fact, emphasizes the rigor and the creativity and the discipline of a thorough audit, as opposed to one that is totally focused, for instance, on cost. That was the purpose, in my mind, of the weighting. And so by taking it out, we're losing, you're eviscerating our ability to communicate our values and what's important to the audit committee and to the city. And I think that is devastating. It's absolutely devastating to the quality of the RFP. I would totally agree with Councilor Huda on that.
So I am happy to give that some further consideration before we send this out the door. I will say this, that it is not typical when I look at how we send out most of our RFPs, whether it's engineering or otherwise. Typically, we don't give percentages. Sometimes we do, but often we don't. And what we find is that if there are questions from proposers, we then answer those questions and we issue a formal addendum. So if we were to get questions from proposers suggesting that they wanted to see if they could get more guidance out of us in terms of the weighting, they were free to submit those, and then we could answer those questions. And again, we've got a February due date, so there is time, because I assume most folks are not going to look at this over the holidays. You've got early January. There is the opportunity, if we feel it's necessary, to look at whether to issue an addendum. But I can tell you, we generally don't have questions of that type. We may have other things, clarifications of the scope of work or the schedule, but we rarely have questions about the weighting when we don't put weighting in, when we just give kind of, you know, the overview, in part because a lot of these guys are professionals and they know what we're looking for. And so they're putting their package together in their marketing division often. You know, they're cutting their, pasting their pieces and then adding in the resumes of the folks who have the most experience or most time availability and putting it together. So I don't think I've ever had a question come back saying, hey, could you tell us in advance what the weighting is? I mean, I may be wrong and I don't see everything, but I hear a lot because a lot of this is what, you know, I do with the purchasing department and public works and that stuff. But that's generally not the question we get. As long as they know that cost is not the determining factor, then they are they are honing in on the elements that they think we're going to be looking for. So, and in this case, because they'll be working with another CPA firm on some of that, I want to say it's like the notes and stuff. There's going to have to be some communication. So you want to make sure that there is good coordination and communication on that point so that everything gets properly looked at and into the opinion and all that kind of stuff. So, which is not that unusual either. We have engineering firms that have to cooperate with each other all the time. But that's an element. Do you cooperate well with third parties? And not just
Well,
in-house staff?
Suzanne,
Sure.
I guess, I don't know how many other RFPs you looked at besides the ones the city develops, but I look at RFPs for the state, and all of them have weights in it. I look at RFPs that I create for our district with the support of our auditors and lawyers, and they all have weights in it. So I don't know if that's just a city decision. I'd be careful saying it's, general practice, because every RFP I have looked at in the last 3 weeks for a state, I've looked at 3 of them as representative for my profession, and they've all had weighted ideas of how they were going to be evaluated. So I just want to throw that out there. I'd like to make a motion that we put the weighted values back in, and that we request the city to do that.
Second. And after that, may I comment?
Aye.
One quickie.
Yep.
Based on your discussion here, I guess I would ask, what you're saying is you have not had anybody come back and ask questions. If we had something that was efficient enough for them not to have ask questions, why would we want to create more work, especially for purchasing and for the director of finance, with questions and stuff like that? So that's another counterpoint there to your pulling this out. I mean, this was very, to me, it was very important, and it gave me the confidence that no matter who we got on this committee, we could follow this.
So like I said, I am happy to revisit that and give, like I said, this was trying to get something to meet your schedule of Wednesday, because I didn't set the Wednesday time. Remember, we just try to work with what worked for you guys. So that's part of the challenge. So I am happy to give that some further thought and see if I can find some other examples. Like I said, there is the way the city typically does it, but it is not necessarily one way. So I'm actually, I can't make any promises, but I'm happy to give that some further thought as to whether to put that back in. And that goes into the dialogue. I think there is value in dialogue, even if we don't always agree on other points. And I'm willing to take that into consideration and chew it over again. Pick Bob Sullivan's brain on this too, and get some thoughts. And like I said, this was trying to get something, knowing you were meeting at 10 and working hard to try and tell you where we were beginning to go based on the conversation last week of whether to include, what to do with the non-attest services. So
I'm aware that it's 11 o'clock. We have a motion on the table to include the weighting in the RFP. It's been seconded. Any further comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
You have to do a roll call, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
That's right.
thank you, Councilor Kennedy.
Counselor Huda?
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Furman?
Yes.
And the chair also votes aye.
I guess I go back to the original thought of putting forward a motion of putting forward a motion to have the city do the RFP the way that we prefer. If they choose not to, then that'll be something that people will have to deal with later on. But I really think that needs to be on the table so that the city council knows that the audit committee agreed to a certain RFP. Now, whether the city chooses, however, Suzanne and Karen choose to handle that, that's their choice. And then there can be ramifications later on by the audit committee and the new city council and the public. But I do believe that we need to have a motion to move the RFP and forward the way we would like it.
I would make that motion, the
So,
RFP as stated by Chairman, I guess the copy before the city's comments here, forward, or adjusted as agreed by the audit committee.
I'll second that.
So are we, I guess we're going to open this for discussion now, right?
Yes, yes.
So would you, as part of the adjustment, accept that Melanson would do the non-attest services?
Well,
and that this would just be written for audit services?
I do. I guess my concern still is that it is not a standard process to go out and, without bidding, and verbally
Yeah.
get a commitment from a
Yeah.
vendor.
Right.
So
But I think-
I'm concerned about that.
but I think that's two different things. I think first we make the motion on what we want, the most appropriate, what meets the federal guidelines, and then how they choose to follow through on that. The question becomes afterwards, did they appropriately go without a professional bidding process, or did they without putting it out there? I mean, I think that is something else, but I still think you need to make the motion on what you want the RFP first, and then how they handle it, we can question later. Understand what I'm saying?
'Cause, yeah, I don't really have any problem with this. I'm just concerned that something's going to happen that is going to come back on us as an audit committee, and we didn't have anything to do with it.
So, I'm sorry, you don't have any concern with?
No, I don't. I mean,
With the draft that before Suzanne made the changes?
I don't have any concern with your draft. I do like that Melanson would be preparing here. I think it's a good idea. My concern is that it wasn't done in the, we're being asked to follow the process, and this wasn't done in the standard process.
Thank
So
you.
that's
Thank you.
where my concern is.
Right.
So let's vote on the motion on the table that we accept the RFP that was presented in the agenda with the corrections made by Chairman White, and that we amend the RFP that was brought forward in the agenda by Chairman White for the changes by Chairman White to include the changes of having Mollison. What does that sound like?
Well, but you're now accepting the process that the city management has introduced, where Melanson is being hired without having.
Oh,
gone
you're right. Never mind, forget that.
Without due process.
So-
I mean, I think there needs to be more discussion on this, and, it's like we're having double standards here. We're being held to one standard that, we can't go out and do this, and then the city just comes in and says, oh, Melanson, do you want to do this? And we got you, verbally. Nothing on paper, nobody has seen anything. So, to me, that's not standard process.
No.
Would you like to comment? So if we are unable to reach an agreement with Melanson, if they were to propose some dollar figure that seemed completely unreasonable to us.
Whatever
There's
that
no.
might be.
Right, but when you've worked with a firm for a number of years, I mean, you know what to expect. I mean, we know when we open up engineering proposals, what we're expecting for prices, you know, and same thing when you talk with lawyers, you know the market, roughly. So if we were not able to negotiate what we thought was a contract in the city's best interest, we could always go out for a separate RFP if we wanted to, or even just send out some quick letters, make some phone calls, get some proposals in from other firms. So we do this, you know, pretty regularly with professional services. You know, we may have a regular, you know, go-to in terms of, say, environmental, you know, information. Yeah, so just
Okay.
know that we've got some
Back in.
flexibility not to be held hostage if you're not happy.
Okay, so the other thing, the other problem I see with this is the city council is going to be asked to do a budget on this in the next budget session. So with putting this in here, we're making the assumption that we don't know the cost, but it will be included in here. And that's, from my perspective, that's another difficult situation to be putting the city council in,
Right.
because basically, in reality, you are doing 2 RFPs technically, and you will have 2 different charges. So what the council really needs to know is this is going to be, example, 70,000. This is plus another 10, another 12. So that's the other problem with this just going, you know, off to the side and doing something, and the council not being aware of this.
Right.
And the audit committee is the council's representative here, so that's the other side note that wasn't discussed is, if staff goes off and negotiates this or whatever you're going to do, how will the audit committee have any idea of where they are in their budgeted amount?
Well, as I said, I'm happy to provide the contract once we get to that point.
Excuse me. I'm
Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree, I agree with your thinking on the Melanson thing, I really do. I just think it makes sense, but we need to know the numbers,
Yeah.
that's all. Yeah.
And I do not want to be making commitments. I would agree with you, Hawk, that, you know, having Melanson do the work just makes a whole lot of sense, but, and it's something that, you know, we've had side conversations about. But I do not want to make a commitment to for the city council regarding expenditure of funds without going through this process, as laborious as it may seem and whatever.
Yeah, this would be for FY '23, so it's something we'd build into the budget.
I know.
So
I know,
that's
but
with a
that's not
number.
our-
Yeah.
That's not our charge.
Right, the city staff would build it into the budget that's presented to the city council in the
But
spring.
but it's not our charge.
I would agree with that.
So, if I could get an amendment, please, to the motion that was made, to simply accept the RFP that was in the agenda, then,
The person that made the motion was Petra, and Hawk seconded, so if they agree with that, then
I would
I'm
agree
fine with it.
that. I would agree with that.
Yep.
is that- okay, so then, and roll call, we're voting on the amendment to accept that the RFP, that we would approve the RFP that was in the agenda. Counselor Huda.
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy.
Yes.
Mr. Furman.
Yes.
Mr. White, yes. Now, Robert's rules, do I now need to go back to the original motion and we vote that down, or what?
I don't think you have to, because I think it was a friendly amendment, so I think you're all set.
That's how I took it too, Councilor Kennedy, that it was more of a friendly amendment.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Phew. Tell you, this ties my mind in knots. Okay, so then I think I would like to also have us meet again, please, And the meeting time I'd like to propose would be 1 PM on 12/30. And the purpose of that meeting will be, among other things, to bring Jesse Lynch on board and to make sure that we've tied up all the loose ends for this calendar year before we launch into the next year. So, can we,
I'm all set.
you're all set? Peter, are
Yep,
you?
I think I'm good.
Counselor Kennedy?
I would have to zoom in. I have no problem doing it on that day, but I have to zoom in. I'm going to be in Western New York.
Okay, thank you.
Want me to see if this room is available?
Yes, please. And Suzanne, would you be available, or Karen?
I will see if one of us, I've got more vacation time that I have not used this year, no surprise, shocking.
Right?
So I am taking some time off, so, yeah, I'll check with Karen and,
Okay.
Since Karen is assigned to be here, it would be great if we,
oh, I'm not feeling the love, Counselor Huda.
I see her presence, I'm sorry.
So I have one more item, and Counselor Kennedy, I'm sorry, I did not get this to you, but it's
That's all
simply
right.
the list of the firms that have expressed interest in bidding on the proposal.
Excellent.
Okay. I think that covers what I had in mind. Are there any other matters before us that we should consider?
No?
I guess I have one question. According to the schedule for this year, December 15th, which is today, would be the final date of Melanson preparing a draft to be submitted to the council in January.
Right.
And I believe of the CAFR. So have you
I have not,
received-
I have not received that. It was a point that I raised in my email to Alina, and so we as an audit committee need to request that.
Well, since we don't have it at this point in time, I was thinking of putting it on the agenda, so we do, and the audit committee, as an extension of the council, does receive that prior to, since it is a draft, I'm
Right.
assuming, at this point in time, so we get to take at least a peek at that and see what is going to be presented to our council, who we are responsible to.
Right. So this would be for the December 30 meeting.
Right. So hopefully, since you haven't received it at this point in time, it should be available. Am I to make that assumption?
today is the deadline for.
Today is the deadline.
15th, yes, for the
And
draft.
if, since we're going to have another meeting as an audit committee, as a counselor, I could still request this at the formal meeting on December 20th.
You can request it. I'm not making any promises at this point. I think by then you may actually have the final, so.
So if we have the final, I guess I would just ask if there's going to be any pushback on that to show it to the council and the audit committee.
Generally, drafts documents are not distributed. And again, this is where we're probably drawing different lines in terms of your authority. But I'm happy to take the request and see if anyone has a different view than I do on that. But generally, what I heard in the whole drafting of the ordinance and the back and forth between city councilors and why the ordinance looks the way it does is that there were some boundaries, if you will, put on this committee in terms of scope and involvement in the process. So, but I'm happy to take the request, and
Okay,
I
so-
do know that they are anticipating that everyone is working and that the deadlines are being met, and we should meet the year-end deadlines. So that's why you may actually have by the 30th, we may be frankly done.
Well,
So,
this whole report should go to the city council anyway. That is the
It does.
goal of the whole audit.
Yes, it
So, I guess, I would ask that, I will put a motion in then to ask that the city council receive a draft. Because it is, the next city council will get the final, and they really haven't been involved or anything like that. But I am very interested to see the perspective and what the report says.
and remember, the final document is a public record, and normally we would roll it out to the city council
Right.
first as a courtesy. So I think that'll be one of the issues we'll have to wrestle with, but maybe we,
Well, I'm
figure
just
that out.
asking to see a draft.
so.
So this will be a motion you make on the 20th? not-
Right. Doesn't have anything to do with this. The reason I waited is because I wanted to know if it was available to you, to
Right.
yourself, because you did request it.
Yeah, nada.
Thank you.
Okay. Hearing no other business in front of us, then we get a motion to adjourn, please.
Motion, we adjourn?
Second?
Still need a roll call.
Roll call.
That's right. I'm beginning to
Sorry.
pick up on this.
Robert's
No.
rules.
Counselor Kennedy, your presence is well worth roll calls.
Well, thank you.
Counselor Huda.
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy.
Yes.
Mr. Furman.
Yes.
Mr. White, aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.